Hi, Remington from Southern Shoddy 3D here, excited to be on the official Blender YouTube channel to let you know that there's a new version of Blender out, Blender 2.83, meaning that we're going to cover all the new features in less than 5 minutes. If you'd like to see a full list of the dev notes, check out the link in the description below, but for now, let's get started. Blender's amazing grease pencil tool just got even better. With a complete overhaul of the drawing engine, you'll see massive FPS improvements, especially on large scenes. One of the most exciting updates is the use of lights with grease pencil objects. You can now add lights to your scenes for some really unique and dynamic effects. Overall, the grease pencil user interface has been refined greatly. There are way too many changes to list out in this video, but the overall user experience has been improved with a focus on efficiency and ease of use. A few new cool operators include merge similar materials to reduce excess materials and reset a fill transform operation, improvements to color palettes, and a cool new tool is the vertex paint mode tools, making it easy to paint vertices in your scenes quickly. This is an exciting new way to save amazing grease pencil tool just got even better. With a complete overhaul of the drawing engine, you'll see massive FPS improvements, especially on large scenes. One of the most exciting updates is the use of lights with grease pencil objects. You can now add lights to your scenes for some really unique and dynamic effects. Overall, the grease pencil user interface has been refined greatly. There are way too many changes to list out in this video, but the overall user experience has been improved with a focus on efficiency and ease of use. A few new cool operators include merge similar materials to reduce excess materials and reset a fill transform operation, improvements to color palettes, and a cool new tool is the vertex paint mode tools, making it easy to paint vertices in your scenes quickly. This is an exciting new way to save time on painting your grease pencil objects. This also gives you the ability to color strokes independently of their material, something not possible before. There's also a new transform fill tool to adjust UVs and a tint tool for adding vertex color. No need to go outside anymore because virtual reality is coming to Blender. This is cool. The first milestone is scene inspection, allowing you to move around your scene in VR with some controls. This is great for directors, clients, and previs. The backend uses OpenXR, which is a new standard for virtual, augmented, and mixed reality. Currently, it supports Windows Mixed Reality and Oculus, and it works on Linux as well. The new object type volume is perfect for simulation junkies and foggy scenes. OpenVDB files can now be imported and rendered with this new volume object. They are added to your scene through the add menu just like any other object, or you can drag VDB files right into the viewport. There's a wireframe and solid mode to give you awesome previews, making it easier than ever to work with these files in the viewport. By default, it renders with the principal volume shader, which of course you can change if you want. There are plans to continue with developing this feature and adding modifier support in the future. More good news for Blender simulations. Hair now has the same collision engine as the cloth engine, yielding much more reliable and realistic collisions. And now you can finally add all those luscious locks to your characters and make them even more beautiful. The cloth self-collision has been optimized, with overall improvements seeing a 15 to 20% increase. Fluid System has had a lot of bug fixes and usability improvements, including improved baking speeds and loading times for particle systems. Blender sculpting tools weren't already amazing enough, they just got even better. Of course, there is the amazing cloth cloth brush, which blew up the internet already, and it has mass, dampening, and radius controls mixed with physics solver and a little bit of magic to generate incredibly realistic and satisfying cloth wrinkles. Once again, proof that wizards are real and that they are staffed by Blender. There's now a mesh boundary auto masking option to protect the boundaries of the mesh when sculpting cloth. A new tool called the clay thumb brush has been added, simulating that you're deforming the clay with your fingers. There are lots of changes to other brushes, most notably the layer brush was completely redesigned to improve artifacts, multi-res, and masking support. Brushes have separate normal and area radiuses now to achieve better behavior when working on curved surfaces. There are now face sets, a new system to control the visibility state of the mesh in sculpting and paint modes, intended to provide more control with complex shapes and overlapping surfaces. Voxel Remesh can now be previewed by pressing Shift R, which is a lot faster than constantly mashing Ctrl Z after a bad remesh. Freestyle is now its own pass. This is great for NPR users looking to have more control over their line work and post. Lots of little changes to improve modeling modifiers. 2.83 really is a massive user experience update. One overlooked feature that has a lot of potential is the fact that a voxel mode has been added to the remesh modifier. This allows you to remesh live, meaning you can combine and mash objects together to get some really fun results for quirky little characters. Multi-resolution has been rewritten from scratch to solve artifacts. Curve editing has seen extruding tool improvements, and now you won't duplicate points, but instead extrude on contiguous selected segments. Metaballs can now be instanced via mesh vertices and faces. In addition, every modifier that can be limited to vertex groups can have their effect inverted as well. Adaptive sampling has been added to cycles. This feature smartly increases samples counts only in the areas where it's needed. This can reduce the overall render time by 10 to 30%. It's enabled with the adaptive sampling setting in the sampling panel. Optic viewport denoising has been added, meaning that Cycles now supports denoising in the viewport with AI acceleration. The noise and wave texture node now have a roughness input to blend between smoother and rougher noise patterns. Eevee now supports more passes, making it a much more viable for final rendering with its ease of compositing. Light caches have been updated with the cube map array system, not only looking better, but it also solves light leaking issues. However, this means if you have an old Eevee project with light maps, you'll have to rebake them when you open them in 2.83. Hair geometry now supports alpha hash and clip modes for transparency with shadow blend modes as well, meaning you can have your Eevee hair look closer to the results in Cycles. If Blender couldn't already do enough, it's taking over video editing with a variety of improvements to its sequencer, including a new toolbar, selection handles, disk cache, and other various improvements. With hundreds of bug fixes and lots of other minor features and improvements as usual, this is a great update, and this release is a great closure for the 2.8 series, paving the way to an even greater 2.9, which will be coming out in just a few months. Join the development fund now to fund the development of Blender and all these amazing updates.
Blender provides a lot of information with its interface, and can be flexible enough to fit the workflow you need. Let's go over some of the basics on how to interpret and interact with Blender's UI. Before we begin, I want to point out that there is a very handy display at the very bottom of the user interface. This is an informative display that lets you know what each click can do in the context your cursor is at the moment. It also applies to when certain hotkeys are being held down to change the function of certain clicks. For example, if you hold Shift, you can see the information at the bottom changing. It tells us that without holding Shift, your middle mouse button rotates your perspective, but holding Shift pans your perspective. Feel free to refer to this display at any time while watching this series or playing around with Blender to learn more of its features. As a quick reference, here are what some of the mouse icons translate to. Now, the next big thing you'll notice is that each important section of the UI is separated into panels. These panels are scalable if you click and drag any of the boundaries, and they can also be whatever you'd like them to be. Simply click the drop-down menu in the top left or bottom left of a panel and select a different type of editor. You can also create more panels by right-clicking a boundary, clicking Split Area, and then left-clicking at a position of the screen you desire. To delete a panel, simply right-click a boundary, click Join Area, and left-click over the panel you'd like to overwrite. Additionally, if you would ever like to maximize a panel to focus on it, simply mouse over an area and press Ctrl Space. You can also press Ctrl Space again to return. While this is extremely powerful, Blender also provides default workspaces you can choose from that set up the appropriate editors for specific workflows. You can find these workspace options in the tabs above. For hotkey users, you can press Control Page Up or Control Page Down. We will be going over each of these workspaces in future videos. However, for this video, we will focus on the primary editors of the Layout workspace. Further introduction of other editors will be given in editor-specific videos. So, let's begin. If you saw our viewport navigation video, then you already know what the viewport is. This is where our 3D scene is displayed. In this editor, you can perform a variety of tasks that interact with your 3D scene and its objects. However, it's important to note that there are two helpful quick menus in the viewport. Simply press T as in Tools, or left-click this arrow here to expand the Quick Tools menu for the viewport. This includes tools such as the Select Box, Move, Rotate, and Scale. For hotkey users, keep in mind you can also use Shift Space at any time to bring up the same tools menu but labeled and at your cursor location. This works similarly to a pie menu in that you have the option to hold the Shift Space hotkey, move your cursor to the tool you want, and release the hotkey to select a tool. You can also press N as in number or left-click the arrow on the right to open additional quick settings, which include your item's transformation data, tool-specific settings, and other viewport options. You'll notice here there is an option for the 3D cursor. This is a very powerful tool which you can see right here. This red and white circle acts as the spawning point for any new objects and can be used as a reference for pivoting, which we'll go over in another video. To place it around your scene, simply hold Shift and right-click. To recenter the cursor, simply press Shift S and select Cursor to World Origin from the pie menu, or adjust the location and rotation settings in the right-hand side quick menu. Now, this feels like a good time to explain what pie menus are for those who are unfamiliar. Pie menus are quick wheel menus that appear around your cursor after a hotkey is pressed. You have three options when navigating a pie menu. The first option is to right-click to cancel in case you changed your mind. The second option is to press and hold the hotkey to initiate the pie menu, drag your cursor to your desired choice, then let go of the hotkey to select, with no clicking necessary. Or the third option is to let go of the hotkey that initiated the pie menu before moving your cursor, then use your cursor to left-click select the option you like. After you get used to where each option is, this can greatly speed up your workflow while also making several options available with less keystrokes. Throughout this series, you will see pie menus quite often for various different contexts. Now below the viewport we have the timeline. This controls playback of your animation. You can zoom in and out with your scroll wheel, drag the timeline with your middle mouse button, change the start and end frames for your output, and create and manipulate keyframes, all of which we'll go over in another video. The Properties editor contains several tabs vertically to display the properties of your scene, your current tool, and whatever object you have selected. To start at the top, this first tab represents the options your currently selected tool in the viewport may have. In this case, the Select Box tool gives you a few different selection options. The next few tabs, which you can see are separated by a small gap, contain your scene-specific properties. Just to clarify, your scene refers to your entire 3D scene. However, you can create more than one scene in a single Blender file by clicking up here. You can also select a scene from existing scenes using this drop-down. This back-facing camera icon is your Render tab. This allows you to change render engines, sampling, engine-specific properties, and other properties that affect your final image and how it's interpreted from the 3D scene. The next icon looks like a printer, and this is your Output tab. This is where all of your output settings can be tweaked before render, resolution, frame rate, file path, file type, and much more. The icon that looks like a stack of photos is the View Layer tab, and is similar to what used to be called render layers. View layers are typically used to separate background and character passes, for example, for easy compositing after a render. However, you'll notice this is only the pass properties, not the objects, and it's for only one view layer, the one we're currently in. To select a different view layer to change its properties, you'll need to go up here, similar to creating a new scene. You can create and select existing view layers here. While we're on the topic, I'd like to point out what this panel above properties is for. In order to specify which collections of objects are rendered out in each view layer, You can check and uncheck collections here in what's called the outliner. I highly recommend using descriptive names for your collections and view layers by double-clicking them, but we will go over this in another video. Next, we have the General Scene tab. This has other miscellaneous scene properties that affect your scene, such as your active camera, your units, and rigid body settings. Finally, the globe icon is the final tab of this section and is called the World tab. This includes properties for the sky and air of your scene. In other words, the surface option for your world is the shader used for your sky or background color, while volume allows for volumetric lighting throughout the atmosphere of your scene as a whole, such as fog or mist. For the next section, the property tabs will be specific to the active object you have selected. So in this case, I will select the cube. Our first tab is the Object tab. This contains basic information such as location, rotation, and scale of the object. You can also specify parent-child relationships, which collections it belongs to, and visibility of the object. The next tab is a very important tab for Blender. Represented by a wrench icon, the Modifiers tab allows for powerful manipulation of objects using predefined modifiers. Simply select a modifier from the drop-down menu to add it to the stack below. You can use as many modifiers as you like and change the order or application of these modifications using these arrows. For example, the Subdivision Surface modifier and the Bevel modifier. This next tab is the Particles tab. You can see the icon looks like an object shooting particles out from its main body. In here, you can create particle systems and add them to the object you have selected. Next is the Physics tab, which looks like an orbiting planet icon. This contains several different types of physics simulations and physics manipulators, including cloth, rigid body, smoke, fluid, collision, and force fields such as wind. The next icon looks like two objects wrapped together. This represents the Constraints tab. This tab is very similar to the Modifiers tab, but deals more so with relationships of the objects you have selected with other objects or values rather than manipulating the object by itself. You can have an object copy the location of another object with the Copy Location constraint, stay above the ground with the Floor constraint, or point at another object with the Tracking constraints. The green triangle icon is for your object's mesh data. To explain what mesh data is, I can tell you that the reason why our cube is a cube is because of the mesh data. If I were to take this exact same object and change the mesh data, its shape would not be the same, but its object properties such as its location would remain the same. Here you can manipulate your vertex groups, also known as weight maps, your shape keys, also known as blend shapes, and your UV maps. Other geometry-specific settings belong here as well. And finally, we have our Material tab. This is represented by a material sphere icon and is where you control much of how your object is shaded during render. The material you choose here will affect how shiny your object is, what color it is, and how rough it may appear to be. The final tab is actually in a different section, as you can see. There's a small gap there. This is the Texture tab, represented with a checkered canvas icon, and is not object specific. Textures exist as separate entities that can be referenced for a number of things, including the world, aka skybox, materials, or brushes. Because of this ubiquity, they are in a separate section. Before we move on, let's go ahead and left-click to select our lamp object. This is the dotted circular thing you see next to our cube. Once you have that selected, you'll have access to its lamp properties, which looks like a light bulb. This is where you can tweak its brightness, the radius of light, whether or not it casts shadows, and what type of lamp it is. We can also left-click to select our camera object, which is this sideways rectangular pyramid shape we have here. Now you should have access to the camera options, which include focal length, perspective type, and much more. And that's the summary for the default layout workspace we see when we open Blender. I hope this is helpful for you, and I'll be going into more detail about the other workspaces and what each editor does in separate videos. So how do we navigate Blender? This may seem intimidating at first, but it's actually pretty simple. Let's start with the 3D viewport. The first thing you'll be curious about is how to select things. Simply left-click any object to select it, and left-click empty space to deselect. You can also press A to select all, and Alt-A to deselect all. Some users may be interested in right-click select, which is arguably better for your health, so we made a separate video about that if you are curious. The next thing you'll want to learn is the basics of navigation, how to rotate, how to pan, and how to zoom your perspective of the viewport. To do that, all you need are these buttons right here. So let's say we want to rotate around our cube. Luckily, we have a very handy gizmo in the top right of our viewport that looks like this. Notice how it responds to our cursor floating above each axis. Go ahead and hover over the blue Z-axis indicator and left-click. You'll notice that it brings you directly into what's called top orthographic view. This can be done for any axis to snap to its corresponding perspective. However, if you instead click and drag the same gizmo, you'll find a much more flexible way of rotating your view of the world. It's important for some to know that you can also middle-click drag to achieve the same effect, but from any cursor position. Now, you'll notice that our view seems to pivot around a particular point in the viewport, that being the center or origin of our grid. This also happens to be where our cube is at the moment. However, what if we didn't want to look at the cube? What if we wanted to look over here or something? Well, now all you have to do is click this hand icon and drag to where you want to have centered. From there, you'll notice your pivot has changed when you rotate your perspective. For hotkey users, simply hold Shift and middle mouse drag to achieve the same effect, but from any cursor position. But let's say I want to focus back on my cube again. How do we do that? Well, for that, I want to quickly show you the Frame Selected tool, which can be found under View. This will reframe your perspective to focus on the object or objects you have selected. This can also be achieved by using the period key on a number pad. Now that we're this close to our cube, you may be asking, how do we zoom in and out? But it's pretty self-explanatory. We have a magnifying glass here. Click and drag it to zoom in and out, or you can use the scroll wheel or plus and minus keys on the numpad to accomplish the same task. And that's basically it for the basics of navigation, but you may have noticed that we haven't used the other two buttons in this area, the camera icon and the grid icon. The camera icon will bring you into the eyes of your camera. This is very helpful for setting up camera angles and previewing what will eventually be your output image. Alternatively, you can also use 0 on the number pad. The fourth button here is a grid. This may confuse you at first, but this switches your viewport between orthographic mode and perspective mode. I went ahead and set up a scene here to make it more obvious to you, but you may be asking, what's the difference between these two modes? Well, perspective mode is a realistic view of the 3D objects in your scene, which takes into account how far away objects are from you into how it displays the object. The further away something is, the smaller it gets visually. However, orthographic mode ignores all of that and flattens your world so that no perspective is seen. Everything is angle perfect. This is an unrealistic view but helps immensely with making models accurate, especially in relation to, say, a 2D concept sketch. But that's just the viewport. In the next video, I'll be talking about all the different windows we see here, what they do, and how to navigate them as well.